Grey. As we continue our 2024 Freedom Defence Canada Speaker Series, we are pleased to have with us tonight Mr. Leighton Grey. Among other things, Leighton is an accomplished lawyer, a speaker, an advocate, and as I learned recently, an athlete as well, and is involved still very much in athletics in terms of hockey particularly. He also hosts, among other things, Grey Matters, which is a podcast dealing with issues of the day and other important topics. I would encourage you to check that out. There's a lot of great stuff there that you can take advantage of. Tonight, we are having Leighton speak about the threats to our free speech and our civil liberties, which are posed by particularly Bills C-63 and C-367, things that I'm sure a number of you have read up on and are very concerned about. So without further ado, I would just say, Leighton, it's a privilege to have you with us tonight, and please take it away.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. I'm going to be talking about free speech. It's been said that free speech is the ultimate freedom because it's the one that you can use to win back all the other freedoms. And freedom of speech, as you probably notice, is very much under attack in our country and throughout the Western world. And the question is why? Well, as much as the left would like to make us all forget history, the truth is we've been here before. We just celebrated something called Victoria Day, which is really a celebration of our British heritage, our Western heritage. But long before Queen Victoria, in England, they had a very bloody century in the 17th century. And that period of time was about a tension, a push and pull between the supremacy of Parliament and the divine right of kings. And on both sides of that debate, one of the things that was at stake was freedom of speech. And during that period, if you don't know that history, Charles I was beheaded. They had a civil war. They had a period of really a theocracy under Oliver Cromwell. They had the Glorious Revolution. And then it all culminated in 1688 in the English Bill of Rights, which is really, to a large degree, is the granddaddy of all the bills of rights that we have in the Anglophone world. Well, why am I talking about this? Well, because during that same period, a very renowned poet, maybe one of the greatest poets in all of English literature, John Milton, who has written more about Satan and Jesus than anyone outside of the Bible, at least in the English language, he appeared before Parliament, and he wrote a tract called Areopagitica, which was a defense of free speech. And one of the quotations was, "Give me the liberty to know, to utter, and to argue freely according to conscience above all liberties." And what he said essentially, and if you don't want to try to plow your way through Miltonian poetry, which is a challenge unto itself, but a worthwhile exercise, what he was essentially saying is that the only kind of speech that needs protection is that which could have the potential to offend. And that's really what my talk is about tonight, because what's at stake in Canada, what's at stake throughout the Western world, is really losing the ability to question anything that the government thinks that you shouldn't be able to say or even think about. So my talk is entitled "Canada Goes All In for 1984. So punishment for thought crimes is becoming the new normal in Canada. And there's a quotation here from George Orwell from his famous novel, which was written in 1948. It's called 1984. And he wrote this. He said, "Thought crime was not a thing that could be concealed forever. You might dodge successfully for a while, even for years, but sooner or later, they were bound to get you." Well, you know, Americans may wish to look up north to see how the latest attacks on free thought and expression are proceeding. In Canada, governments, universities, and self-regulating organizations regularly attack the core civil rights that have long allowed individuals in English-speaking democracies like Canada to flourish and innovate, the right to think and to speak. The one recent famous example you've probably heard about is the College of Psychologists of Ontario, which harassed former Harvard and University of Toronto psychology professor Dr. Jordan Peterson because they didn't like his tweets. They demanded that he undergo social media training. He refused, went to court, lost, and may lose his license to practice in Ontario. Now, if you know anything about Dr. Jordan Peterson, he probably could teach seminars on the successful use of social media. So I would hate to be the instructor in that class. But there are many other instances in which free speech is being similarly suppressed in Canada. British Columbia nurse Amy Ham, you probably heard about this case, for instance, was persecuted by her own nurses association for her off-work sponsorship of a local billboard that endorsed the view of famed British author J.K. Rowling on gender transition issues. Now, Ham's disciplinary hearing ended a couple of months ago, but she might soon face the same choice as Peterson, submitting to Orwellian re-education or to give up her profession as a nurse. In Calgary, in Alberta in 2021, another professional lost her tenured job and career because she stood up for Enlightenment-inspired empiricism. Mount Royal University fired Professor Francis Widdowson, a Marxist with a long history of involvement with, sympathy to, and publications on Canada's Native populations. What was her thought crime? Well, she pointed out that there was no such thing as Indigenous knowledge, but that facts and data, science, and the scientific method are available to all. And all that has chilled the ability of Canadians to think, talk, and argue out loud, lest we be canceled, harassed, or fired. And it's getting worse. Now, thanks to Justin Trudeau's federal government, prosecution and jail could be added to the list of consequences for free speech offenses. In late February, the Liberal government introduced draft legislation in Parliament, Bill C-63. Now, it purports to increase online protection for children. Officially named the Online Harms Act, that part of the legislation is laudable. However, we already have plenty of legislation on the books to deal with that problem. But what is not praiseworthy about this act are the tacked-on provisions that will further restrict the rights of Canadians to speak, debate, and dissent. For example, the bill creates a hate crime offense, which in the eyes of government, is content that foments hatred. Now, such hatred is defined in the bill as that which expresses detestation or vilification of an individual or a group. It's a very, very broad net. And this is based on categories in the existing Canadian Human Rights Act. For those outside Canada not familiar with this list, it's all-encompassing. Anyone, quote, motivated by hatred based on race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical ability, sexual orientation, or gender identity or expression. To helpfully define hatred, one aspect of the bill adds this clarification. Hatred means the emotion that involves detestation or vilification and that is stronger than disdain or dislike. Now that is being defined, that's determined in the eyes of government. Note that in this case, it's not actions that are being outlawed, but thought. The key word being the allegation that someone might be motivated by hate to speak against the cited list of groups. Note as well that a civil servant in the human rights bureaucracy will now have a hand